We start by seeing a boy playing soccer on a beach in Mexico. It's almost dark and there's nobody around. Suddenly, the boy finds a helmet with a camera attached. When he plays the first video, we see two surfers enjoying the sunny weather and having fun. However, they are soon attacked by a huge shark, which tears them apart. The boy is horrified by their screams, so he immediately runs away from the place. 2 days earlier, an American tourist named Nancy Adams is heading to the same beach. From her conversation with the driver, we learned that she was an aspiring medical student. However, after the recent death of her mother, who had a terminal illness, she decided to change her field of work. Nancy also reveals that her mother got pregnant at that same beach, which is why it's special to her. After a while, they finally arrive at the beach. It's a stunningly beautiful place, exactly as Nancy had imagined. The best part is that the beach is almost empty, except for a few local surfers. As soon as the driver leaves, Nancy quickly changes into her wetsuit and prepares her surfboard, which was left by her mother. Then, she dives into the sea and starts paddling towards the waves. Reaching a bit farther, she meets the two surfers, who seem friendly. Nancy asks if there's anything she should know about the place, and one of them reveals that the jellyfish found there are very dangerous. He also explains that there are some reefs that only appear at night, when the tides are low. After a brief chat, the three grab their boards and surf the waves. Even Nancy seems professional. A few hours later, the guys get tired and decide to leave. However, Nancy, who came from so far in the United States, wants to have a bit more fun. She mentions that she'll stay there for a few more hours and bids them goodbye. As soon as the guys leave, Nancy feels something approaching her in the water. Fortunately, it's just a group of dolphins, jumping excitedly. Nancy is delighted by their beauty and playfulness, so she decides to follow them. Surprisingly, after a few minutes, she realizes that the sea is completely full of blood. It turns out that the blood is coming from a dead whale, probably hunted a few days ago. Realizing that a predator is nearby, Nancy gets on her board and starts paddling to a safe spot. Unfortunately, the beast has already noticed her. It attacks the board and throws Nancy among the rocks. Somehow, Nancy manages to get back on her board, but the beast grabs her leg and pulls her into the water, soon revealing itself to be a huge great white shark. In the ensuing struggle, Nancy's leg is severely wounded, turning the water around her red. But, despite this, she manages to escape and climb onto the whale's carcass. Once there, Nancy finally realizes the gravity of the situation. She screams and cries for help, but as expected, no one can hear her, as she is too far from the beach. Meanwhile, the shark is still determined to finish off the intruder. It starts to repeatedly slam into the whale's carcass, causing Nancy to almost fall into the water. Therefore, she decides to find a more stable surface where she can hide from the shark. She looks around and notices two options. The first is a buoy floating in the water, but it seems too far away. The second option is a reef that is starting to appear due to the low tides. The only problem is that it will sink again the next day. Nancy is undecided, but eventually chooses the reef, yet the shark's hit on the carcass makes Nancy fall into the sea. Then she swims, even with the wounded leg, desperate to save her life. The situation looks very dangerous, but fortunately, Nancy manages to reach the reef. There, she finds another victim of the shark, a seagull. It was peacefully on the whale's carcass when the shark scared it away. Nancy sympathizes with the bird, but for now, she has her own problems. To stop the bleeding on her leg, she uses her ornaments and performs an improvised operation. The procedure makes her scream in pain, but little does she know that this is just the beginning of a terrifying situation. After sewing the wound, she ties her wetsuit around it, ensuring it doesn't get infected. Nancy now must wait for a miracle, and for someone to appear there to rescue her. A few hours later, night comes, and it gets extremely cold. Nancy makes more modifications to her wetsuit and turns it into a sort of jacket. However, the resilient seagull needs none of that. It simply looks at Nancy with disapproving eyes, probably thinking she is a weak being. Later in the night, the two eat some crabs and form a bond. At one point, Nancy notices her surfboard floating not too far from her. With hope that the shark has gone away, she slowly enters the water. However, as she swims for a few minutes, she notices the menacing fin of the great white shark emerging on the surface. Nancy uses her last strength and returns to the reef, but in the process, she injures her leg again. At this point, she nearly gives up. The reef will disappear in a few hours, and if the shark doesn't kill her, her worsened wound probably will. But then, Nancy sees a ray of hope. It's a drunk man who was passed out on the beach. Since he's not too far away, Nancy screams for help, and fortunately, he wakes up. She then instructs him to make a call from her phone, which is stored in her bag. The man seems to be cooperating, but as soon as he checks the bag, greed takes over him. Right in front of Nancy's eyes, he takes all her money, puts her phone in his pocket, and prepares to leave. But then, he notices the surfboard floating in the water and decides to steal it too. Despite everything the greedy man did, Nancy repeatedly warns him of the danger, but in vain. He enters the water and also reaches the surfboard. But before he can return to the beach with it, the shark attacks him, tearing him in half. Nancy can only watch in horror, realizing there's no way out. The next morning, she's woken up by some splashes of water. This means that the tides are rising, and in a few hours, the reef will completely sink. Now, Nancy has to figure out a way to escape the sea as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the two surfers from the previous day arrive at the beach. They immediately notice Nancy on the reef and start approaching her on their surfboards. Nancy tries her best to explain that a shark is nearby, but the guys, who are regulars of the place, believe she is joking. Unfortunately, the next second, the killer shark leaps into the air and swallows one of the surfers. Witnessing this, his friend panics and starts swimming anxiously towards Nancy. He finally arrives, but before she can pull him up, the shark drags him into the depths of the sea. The sight of a human dying right in front of her horrifies Nancy. But she knows she has to be strong if she wants to see her family again. After a while, she picks up the seagull and starts to care for its wounds. The little bird bites her at first, obviously annoyed by 3 men being killed because of her, but after a while, it calms down. Later, as Nancy looks for ways to escape the reef, she notices the helmet of the second surfer, which has a camera on it. This is the same camera we saw at the beginning of the film. And despite the shark still circling around the place, Nancy wants to retrieve it. However, this time, she has an idea in mind. Using her watch, she calculates the exact time the shark takes to make a complete rotation of the reef. It turns out to be 30 seconds. Shortly after, Nancy waits for an opportune moment and dives into the water. She manages to grab the camera without any problems, but on her way back, the shark begins to chase her. Nancy somehow returns to the reef, but the resilient shark tries to jump onto the surface to snatch her off. Fortunately, the sharp rocks and poisonous plants repel it back into the water. After another near-death experience, Nancy finally has something that will help her in the middle of the sea. She watches the video recorded on the camera, lamenting the sad fate of the boys. Thinking she won't make it out, she decides to record a message for her family, telling them to stay strong in case she dies in this ocean. Nancy then records another message asking for help. After finishing, she throws the camera back into the sea, hoping it reaches the beach, where someone will watch her video and come to help her. An hour later, it's almost noon. The high tides will soon come and sweep the reef away. Now, Nancy will have to dive into the water and reach the buoy at all costs. Although the distance to it is 100 meters, which will take at least 2 minutes to reach, Nancy has to act. She knows the shark will likely catch up to her, but she has to try. Before leaving, however, she puts the seagull on a broken piece of surfboard and sends it away, hoping the waves will take it to the beach. After a while, as Nancy prepares to dive into the water, she notices hundreds of jellyfish swimming nearby. This gives her an idea. She remembers how the surfers warned her that these animals are very dangerous. Although it's a risky move, Nancy decides to swim among the jellyfish and use them as a shield against the shark. The plan works, and the shark dares not approach her. It seems to be terrified of the jellyfish. After some time, Nancy finally reaches the buoy, but while she is climbing, the strap breaks, causing her to fall back into the water. The shark also arrives, and it seems like it will tear her to pieces. However, Nancy bravely stabs it with the piece of metal, giving her enough time to climb onto the buoy. After that, she looks through the hidden compartment and finds a flare. Nancy immediately fires the flare into the sky to ask for help, but it seems that there is no one around. At this point, the shark has also become very aggressive and repeatedly keeps hitting the buoy. It's just a matter of minutes before it sinks. Then, with time running out, she devises another plan. Nancy realizes that the nearby whale carcass has started to leak oil, so she fires the remaining flare into the ocean. As soon as she does, the oil catches fire, setting the shark ablaze too. The massive beast struggles for a while but then dives into the water and extinguishes the fire. It seems nothing can take it down. Meanwhile, on the beach, the boy who was playing football at the beginning of the film finally found the camera. After watching the videos, he immediately runs to get help. Back at the buoy, the shark has become even more aggressive and is constantly banging on it. Piece by piece, it disintegrates the large structure and eventually destabilizes it. Nancy holds on, as if she falls, it's certain death. At a certain point, the buoy goes underwater and that's when Nancy notices the anchor holding it. Located at the bottom of the sea, the anchor is made up of several pointed rods, which gives her one more idea. So, while the shark is still attacking the buoy, she gets off it and disconnects the chain. The chain is so heavy that it starts to pull Nancy into the depths of the ocean. The shark finally realizes this and begins to follow her. Now, Nancy has to make her final move. Although the plan can easily result in her death, it's her only chance. So by luring the beast into the trap, Nancy manages to avoid the sharp irons by inches. But the shark, not seeing this, is pierced and killed instantly, putting an end to her nightmare. In the next scene, the boy finally arrives with his father, who is none other than the driver from before. He sees Nancy lifeless on the beach and immediately starts to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation. She is also relieved to know that her seagull partner was able to save herself with her help. A few years later, Nancy is seen on a beach in Texas. She has recovered from her injuries, leaving only a few scars on her legs. The film ends as she, along with her sister, jumps into the sea.